You've always heard fruit is healthy, but after 60, that's not always true. Some fruits can quietly spike your blood sugar, while others can help bring it back in balance. In this video, we're ranking 5 common fruits, from the sneaky troublemakers to the ones that truly support your health. Like, subscribe, and drop it in the comments if you're ready to eat smarter. And now, it's time for the intro. 3, 2, 1. On a quiet Thursday morning in early spring, Joe stood by the window of his kitchen, watching a squirrel steal a fig from the tree he'd planted 20 years ago. He chuckled to himself, then sat down with a bowl of sliced bananas and a glass of fresh orange juice, his usual breakfast. The sun was rising over the hills of eastern Oregon, casting a golden glow on the backyard garden he'd lovingly tended since retirement. At 72, gardening wasn't just a hobby, it was a ritual that gave his days structure and meaning. Joe had always believed in the power of natural foods. He grew his own grapes, kept a row of strawberry plants, and prided himself on avoiding processed snacks. "I don't eat junk," he would often tell his daughter, Linda, who worked as a nurse at the local clinic. But recently, Joe had started feeling off in a way he couldn't quite explain. He felt sluggish by mid-morning, even after a full night's sleep. His legs would feel heavy, and sometimes, he'd catch himself sitting back down in the garden chair sooner than planned, just to rest for a moment. Linda noticed too. One afternoon, as she brought over groceries, she saw him wincing as he tried to bend down to tie his boot. "Dad, are you feeling all right?" she asked, kneeling beside him. Joe brushed it off with a grin, just stiff from the cold. "Nothing a hot cup of tea won't fix." But the tiredness didn't go away. Some mornings, Joe felt dizzy when standing up. Other times, he'd find his vision slightly blurry when he tried to read the newspaper. He chalked it up to aging. Linda, however, wasn't convinced. A week later, she brought over a home blood sugar monitor and gently asked him to check a reading, just in case. The number surprised them both. It wasn't dangerously high, but it was outside the healthy range. Joe looked at the device, then at his daughter. "But I hardly eat sweets," he protested. That's when Linda explained what she'd seen so often in her patients. "Dad, some fruits can spike your blood sugar, especially when eaten alone. Bananas, raisins, even that orange juice you love, they're not always as harmless as they seem." It was a turning point for Joe. Not dramatic, but quiet and unsettling. How could something so natural, so seemingly healthy, be part of the problem? For decades, he'd trusted fruit as a symbol of wellness. Now he was learning there might be more to the story. The next morning, Joe walked out to his garden not with the same lightness, but with a hint of concern. He looked at the grapevine climbing the trellis, the peach tree in the corner, and the baskets of ripe produce he had always seen as a gift. Now, for the first time, he wondered, which ones were actually helping him, and which might be silently hurting him. That weekend, Joe sat at his kitchen table, staring at the half-peeled banana in his hand. It was strange, he thought, how something so simple could suddenly feel complicated. He remembered the morning when Linda had tested his blood sugar, how she looked more concerned than she let on. It hadn't left his mind since. Joe decided to pay closer attention to his routine. Not just the food, but how he felt, before eating, after eating, while gardening, during his afternoon walks. And gradually, a pattern began to emerge. After his usual breakfast of bananas and toast, or sometimes grapes and a glass of orange juice, he often felt sleepy, even a little irritable. His energy would dip by mid-morning, and instead of tending to the soil or trimming branches, he'd find himself sitting on the porch, hands folded, mind wandering. There were other signs too, little things he'd brushed aside. Like how his vision sometimes blurred when he read the newspaper headlines. Or how his feet would tingle after dinner, a sensation that wasn't exactly painful but certainly not normal. He thought maybe it was just what happened at 72. Maybe it was just age catching up. But then there was that afternoon at the local farmer's market. Joe had just finished a small fruit parfait, layered with strawberries, blueberries, and a generous drizzle of honey. 15 minutes later, as he wandered past the craft stalls, he felt lightheaded. The world tilted ever so slightly, like he'd stood up too fast. He grabbed the edge of a display table to steady himself and took a seat on a nearby bench. The sensation passed, but it left behind a quiet fear he couldn't shake. That night, Joe told Linda what had happened. She didn't panic, but she did pause. "Dad, do you remember if you ate anything before that?" He thought back. "Just the fruit thing." She nodded. "That might have done it. Even fruits like grapes and strawberries can spike your blood sugar if there's too much at once, especially with honey on top." She explained how for someone over 60, the body processes sugar differently. "You may not be diabetic," she said, "but your body might be less efficient at regulating the sugar rush." Joe felt a mix of emotions. Confused, embarrassed, even betrayed. He'd spent his whole life avoiding processed snacks, steering clear of soda, and yet here he was, being warned about blueberries. But Linda reassured him. "It's not about avoiding fruit," she said. "It's about timing, portions, and combinations. Fruit isn't bad, but for someone in your shoes, the wrong kind at the wrong time can lead to hidden blood sugar spikes." The next few days, Joe became almost obsessive. He started writing things down, what he ate, how he felt afterward. He noticed that eating an apple with lunch made him feel fine, but having it alone in the morning made him sluggish. Raisins made his fingers feel stiff by mid-afternoon. Orange juice gave him a headache if he didn't have protein with it. He also began noticing how many other older friends and neighbors had similar habits. Mr. Dawson down the street started every morning with a smoothie, banana, mango, and pineapple. Mrs. Raines, his bridge partner, always brought dried cranberries to the game. These were all people trying to eat healthy, just like him. That realization was sobering. It wasn't just him. It was a misunderstanding they all shared, that fruit equals health, no matter what. But Joe was starting to see that the story was more nuanced. Fruit can be medicine, but only if you know how and when to use it. So he kept watching, kept listening to his body. Some days were better than others. He didn't always get it right. But every note he jotted down brought him closer to understanding the connection between what he ate and how he felt. And quietly, in the background of all this, the questions grew louder. If fruit could cause these problems, could the right fruits help fix them? One chilly Monday morning, Joe made himself a cup of black coffee and sat down at the kitchen table with the latest issue of Silver Living, a health magazine he'd subscribed to for years but never really read beyond the gardening tips. Today, something in the bold, red headline caught his eye: "Not all fruits are created equal, the hidden sugar trap for seniors." He hesitated, then turned to page 14. The article opened with the story of a retired piano teacher in Arizona who had started experiencing neuropathy symptoms despite having a clean diet. Her mistake? Eating fruit all day, especially dried ones and fruit juices, under the belief they were always safe. Joe felt a jolt. This sounded eerily familiar. As he read on, the article broke things down in plain language. It explained how, after age 60, the pancreas often slows down, making it harder for insulin to keep up with sugar surges. And while fruit contains natural sugars, not all sugars are processed equally by aging bodies. Certain fruits, particularly those high in glucose or fructose, can raise blood sugar levels rapidly, especially when eaten alone or in large portions. The article listed 5 fruits to be cautious with: grapes, watermelon, ripe bananas, mangoes, and dried fruits like raisins and dates. Joe winced. These were exactly the ones he'd grown, harvested, and eaten with pride. But it wasn't all bad news. The author, a seasoned endocrinologist named Dr. Luis Carranza, offered guidance rather than guilt. He wrote, "Fruit isn't the enemy. But for seniors, the key lies in pairing it wisely, choosing the right types, and respecting your body's slower processing speed. He recommended eating fruit alongside a source of protein or healthy fat, avoiding fruit juices altogether, and focusing on low glycemic options like berries, apples, and grapefruit. Joe closed the magazine and stared out the window. The wind had started to pick up, rustling the bare branches of his peach tree. For the first time, he didn't feel betrayed by the fruit, but rather, by his own assumptions. Maybe, he thought, he'd been asking the wrong question. It wasn't, is fruit good or bad, but, is this fruit good for me, right now? That afternoon, he drove to the local library, a place he hadn't visited in years, and asked the librarian if they had any books on nutrition and aging. She pointed him toward a small section in the health aisle, where he picked up a book titled Aging and Blood Sugar, What Your Doctor Might Not Tell You. He checked it out, along with another book written by Dr. Carranza, and returned home feeling oddly energized. Later that evening, over dinner with Linda, he shared what he'd learned. She smiled, relieved that her dad was not only listening, but actively seeking answers. You know, she said gently, there's a specialist at my clinic who trained under Dr. Carranza. His name's Dr. Paul Everett. He's in his 60s, like you. Down-to-earth guy. I think you'd like him. Joe hesitated. He'd never been one for doctors unless absolutely necessary. But something had shifted in him. This wasn't about fear anymore, it was about understanding. Set it up, he said quietly. The following week, Joe walked into Dr. Everett's office, holding his food journal and the articles he'd read. The doctor greeted him warmly, with the calm confidence of someone who'd spent decades listening, not just lecturing. They went through Joe's notes together, what he ate, when he felt sluggish, what seemed to help or hurt. Dr. Everett nodded thoughtfully. You're already halfway there, he said. Most folks don't even notice the patterns, let alone write them down. Then the doctor pulled out a laminated chart showing how different fruits affect blood sugar, adjusted for seniors. He pointed to a row. See here. Bananas, these go from helpful to harmful depending on ripeness. The more brown spots, the faster they spike sugar. Joe nodded. He had never thought to notice that before. They discussed simple strategies: eat fruit as part of a meal, not on an empty stomach, favor fiber-rich fruits like apples and berries, skip the juice and eat the whole fruit instead. Joe scribbled everything down. Before leaving, Dr. Everett said something that stuck with him. Joe, you don't need to fear food, you just need to learn its language again. And lucky for you, you're still fluent. Joe left the clinic not with a prescription, but with a plan, and a feeling he hadn't felt in a while, empowered. Joe's first breakfast after meeting Dr. Everett looked very different. Gone were the bananas and glass of orange juice. In their place, a small bowl of unsweetened oatmeal topped with chia seeds, a few fresh blueberries, and a boiled egg on the side. He looked at the plate with a mix of skepticism and curiosity. It wasn't flashy. But it felt deliberate. The first few days were about unlearning habits he had followed for decades. He still craved the sweetness of fruit in the morning, but now he paired it with something that slowed sugar absorption: protein, healthy fats, fiber. He replaced juice with water or green tea. Grapes were replaced with a few slices of green apple. And when he did miss his old comforts, he told himself something Dr. Everett had said: you're not giving things up. You're giving your body a chance to catch up. Joe kept his notebook close. Every meal, every snack, every unexpected headache or moment of clarity, it all went in the margins. He noticed that when he had berries after a meal, he felt sharp and alert. When he ate a banana mid-morning, even just half, his hands would feel heavy an hour later. One evening, Linda made a chicken salad and served it with slices of avocado and grapefruit. Joe was hesitant. He had always assumed grapefruit was off-limits, but the combination left him feeling light, satisfied, and awake. By the second week, his blood sugar readings began to show subtle changes. The post-meal spikes were lower. His energy held steadier into the afternoon. And, most surprising to him, his sleep improved. For years, Joe had accepted restless nights as part of aging. But now, with better balanced meals, he slept longer and deeper. No more waking at 3 a.m. with legs that felt like pins and needles. At Linda's suggestion, Joe added a short 15-minute walk after each main meal. Nothing too intense, just around the block, sometimes with a podcast, sometimes with silence. He found these walks helped him not only physically, but emotionally. They gave him time to process his new routine, to observe how small shifts in habit could bring big changes in how he felt. Shopping for groceries became a different experience. He spent more time reading labels, looking for added sugars even in items he'd once considered safe, like granola bars or yogurt. One afternoon at the store, he saw a woman around his age holding a pack of dried apricots. She looked at him, hesitated, and said, "They say these are good for digestion, right?" Joe gave a small smile. "They can be," he said, "but they'll spike your sugar fast if you're not careful." They ended up chatting in the aisle for 10 minutes. Dr. Everett had also introduced Joe to a simple framework: think of meals as partners, not solo acts. Fruit should rarely be the star, more like a supporting actor. A handful of raspberries after lunch, or slices of kiwi with a bit of Greek yogurt in the evening, these combinations kept his blood sugar steady and his cravings in check. Some changes were harder. Joe missed his mid-afternoon raisin snack and the peach preserves he used to spread on toast. At first, he felt almost guilty turning his back on the flavors of his youth. But as the days went by, he noticed something unexpected: his taste buds began to reset. Natural sweetness, like the soft tartness of a fresh blackberry or the mellow creaminess of half a ripe avocado, began to feel more satisfying than the syrupy sweetness he once craved. He also experimented with new fruits he hadn't paid much attention to before. Linda introduced him to kiwi, fiber-rich, low in sugar, and refreshingly tangy. They discovered a local market that sold pink grapefruit, freshly harvested, with a less bitter finish. Together they made a habit of trying one new produce item each week, sometimes cooking it together, sometimes just tasting and laughing at the results. Joe also became something of a quiet mentor to his neighbors. He never preached. But when someone asked, he shared what he'd learned, not just about fruit, but about listening to your body as it ages. He told them how the same food could affect two people completely differently, and that the real power was in paying attention. One day, while pruning his blueberry bush, Joe stopped and looked at his garden with new eyes. This place, which had once just been a source of food, now felt like a conversation. He was learning to listen, to what his body needed, to what nature offered, and to the quiet wisdom that sometimes comes only with time and effort. Joe still enjoyed fruit. That never changed. But now it was on his terms, with balance, with thoughtfulness, and with a kind of respect he hadn't known it deserved. By early summer, the garden behind Joe's house was alive again, not just with color, but with new intention. The blueberry bushes were thriving, their leaves greener than ever, and in a sunny corner near the fence, Joe had planted a row of dwarf apple trees, the kind recommended for their lower sugar content and high fiber. Each morning, he strolled among the rows, basket in hand, moving slower but steadier than he had in months. He no longer measured progress by how many bags of compost he lifted or how many weeds he pulled. These days, he measured it by how he felt walking up the slight hill behind the shed, no longer breathless, no longer needing to sit and rest a minute. His legs no longer tingled at night. His hands, once stiff after long days, now moved easily, comfortably. And perhaps most importantly, his mind was sharper. He remembered to return phone calls, could hold a long conversation without losing track of his words, and read each evening without his eyes glazing over. Small victories, he thought. But they were his. One afternoon, Linda stopped by with a tray of grilled salmon, brown rice, and sautéed spinach. She set it down on the patio table and smiled. "It's our celebration lunch," she said. 3 months of new habits. And your labs came back this morning. Your A1C dropped. You're well out of the danger zone. Joe blinked. Really? She nodded. Really? He let out a long breath, part relief, part something deeper, a quiet kind of pride. They ate outside in the soft breeze, watching butterflies float past the herb planters. After lunch, Joe showed Linda a new patch he'd started, one dedicated entirely to low-glycemic produce, kale, spinach, cucumbers, and even a new trial patch of aronia berries. Apparently they're packed with antioxidants, he said with a grin. Dr. Everett would be proud. But the change wasn't just in Joe's pantry or garden. It was in his presence. He no longer moved through his days on autopilot. He cooked with care, walked with awareness, and chose what he ate not just for flavor, but for how it made him feel afterward. At the community center's monthly potluck, Joe brought a salad of arugula, apples, and crushed walnuts with a lemon vinaigrette. A neighbor asked if he was on a diet. Joe laughed and said, "No, just finally listening to what my body's been trying to tell me for years." Others nodded. Some asked for the recipe. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Joe and Linda took a walk through the park near his home. It had become their ritual, something quiet, shared, unhurried. They didn't talk about blood sugar or food journals anymore. They talked about small joys, the color of the clouds, the smell of fresh-cut grass, the way the ducks always seemed to waddle in pairs. Joe paused near the pond and looked around. "I used to think health was about rules," he said softly. "What not to eat, what not to do. But now, I think it's about understanding. And learning to live with kindness toward yourself." Linda touched his arm gently. "That's the best kind of medicine," she said. They continued walking, the sky above them streaked with soft gold. Behind them, the world felt a little quieter. Ahead, it felt just a bit more open.